Hi everyone. Our topic of the week is going to be caffeine, and today it's going to be presented by Francesca and Joseph from Party in the Right Spirit and Rayan and Atif from the Mental Wellness Group. So we're going to start today with a statement of acknowledgement of traditional land. So I wish to acknowledge this land on which the University of Toronto operates. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and the Mississaugas of the Credit River. Today, this meeting place is still the home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land. I'm going to start off today with just a little bit of significance of caffeine and why we chose this as our topic today. So caffeine is a prominent part of the post-secondary environment and culture. Caffeine is widely accepted and coffee is consumed all around the world. It plays a really big role in community. That being said, caffeine is still considered a substance that has an effect on our bodies and our mind. So while it is widely accepted, I think it's still really important to understand how it works and kind of the effects that it has on us. So today we're going to be giving you some general information about how caffeine works, maybe some caffeine sources and some pros and cons would be useful for you to know. So I'm going to go starting off with the caffeine basics. I think the main reason people consume caffeine is because of the fact that it increases our alertness and our focus. So this is just going to kind of tell you how that is actually happening within our brain. So caffeine works primarily by blocking the adenosine receptors in our brain. Adenosine is a neurotransmitter that promotes sleep by decreasing our alertness. So basically when adenosine is working, it's gonna make us feel a little bit sleepier, and that's what it does. So when caffeine comes in and blocks the adenosine receptors, it's gonna be stopping our brain from getting these volume down signals, which means that it's basically gonna be increasing our alertness. So caffeine isn't actually giving us energy, it's not providing us with energy, but basically it's just gonna stop you from feeling sleepy and stop you from feeling tired. If you've ever heard of the caffeine crash, that is basically happening because while caffeine is working in your brain, adenosine is building up, and then eventually when caffeine wears off, you're going to kind of have a sensory overload of your adenosine receptors, which is what's going to cause those feelings of sleepiness or inability to focus. Next, I'm going to talk about caffeine dependency. So just a quick disclaimer, there's absolutely nothing wrong with consuming caffeine. Just because you consume caffeine, that does not make you dependent. But since caffeine is a drug, it is a substance, I think it's really interesting and also useful information to understand how it's working in our brain. That way, if you've ever noticed some sort of adverse reaction, if you've ever been feeling irritated or you get maybe a headache if you miss your caffeine in the morning, this is just useful information so you can maybe understand why this is occurring. So caffeine dependency occurs because the consumption of caffeine actually increases dopamine production in our brain. Dopamine release within the reward circuit is what's responsible for most habit-forming behavior. That can be if you brush your teeth or the reason that you eat breakfast, stuff like that, habit-forming behavior. So adenosine is located all over the brain, but when adenosine works within the reward circuit, it's actually going to slow down the activity in this area. But as we know, caffeine blocks adenosine. So when caffeine comes into the reward circuit, it's actually going to stop adenosine from working, and then it's going to increase the dopamine within this area, which is what's going to cause those habit-forming behaviors of caffeine. So again, there's absolutely nothing wrong with consuming caffeine, but it is interesting, and I think it's also useful information to understand how it works. That way you can be aware and be mindful. So this is going to be a little reflection question to recap on maybe why are some reasons people use caffeine in university life. So you can feel free to pause the video and then give this question some thought. And then when you're ready, you can press play again.
Okay, thank you, Francesca. So what are some pros of consuming caffeine? Well, one pro is that they're a good source of antioxidants, and antioxidants are compounds that help our body fight against free radicals. And free radicals are molecules that can harm our cells if their amounts become too high. Caffeine also improves our mental alertness, which is what allows us to stay awake during lecture or help us focus when we study. Caffeine can also decrease LDL cholesterol, also known as bad cholesterol, and it just improves overall mental functioning and our mood. So it can provide us, it can make us feel more alert, and it can help us focus better. Okay, so some cons of consuming caffeine. One con is that it can impede our sleep because, as what Francesca explained before, caffeine blocks our adenosine receptors, so it makes us feel more alert and less sleepy. So if you consume caffeine too close to bedtime, then that can affect the quality of your sleep. Caffeine can also be addictive because caffeine increases the dopamine levels in our brains. So it can make it hard to break that caffeine consuming behavior, especially if you consume caffeine on a regular basis. Caffeine can also cause anxiety in some people. It can temporarily raise blood pressure and body temperature shortly after consumption. Caffeine can also stimulate urination, which can result in greater fluid loss from the body. And finally, caffeine can also lead to the dehydration and loss of certain vitamins like B and C and minerals such as calcium and iron. Vitamins B and C, they are essential vitamins that are water soluble. So they actually need to be replenished regularly since they're lost through urine. So how does caffeine affect your body? One way it does so is by increasing the stomach acid you have, and this can cause heartburn and an upset stomach in some people. You can imagine that this is definitely problematic for those that have acid reflux or stomach ulcers. So it's highly recommended that you speak with a doctor if you have these problems before you consume any type of caffeine. Caffeine also doesn't get stored in the body for very long. It only takes around 4 hours for half a given dose of caffeine to be metabolized. And it's because of this quick metabolism that causes frequent urination and an increase in fluid loss. Caffeine tends to reach its highest blood concentration 1 to 2 hours after consumption. And caffeine can also stimulate the release of adrenaline in your body, which can temporarily raise blood pressure. So this can be problematic for those that have hypertension or any sort of heart problems like irregular heart rhythms. Um, if you consume large amounts of caffeine over long periods of time, it can cause bone thinning and muscle twitch. So this can be problematic for those that have osteoporosis. It's because caffeine interferes with the absorption and metabolism of calcium. So that's something you should definitely speak with your doctor about if you experience any sort of these like bone or like muscle problems. And finally, caffeine is what we call teratogenic because it can cause abnormal field development in pregnant women. That's because caffeine travels in the bloodstream, and if it crosses the placenta, it can cause changes to the baby's metabolism, heart rate, and other developmental processes. Caffeine can also increase the risk for miscarriage. So researchers do say that for women trying to get pregnant, they should limit their caffeine intake to around 200 to 300 milligrams per day, since caffeine can cause changes to estrogen production and other metabolism in women.
Okay, so we put together this table here that kind of has a bunch of popular beverages along with their serving size and their caffeine content. We thought this was a really great visual to associate serving size with caffeine content. It seems pretty self-explanatory. Obviously, a larger serving size would probably have a higher amount of caffeine, but personally, I just never really put two and two together. So this was just a really great visual if you were ever curious as to the caffeine content and in any beverages like a Starbucks coffee or something. So you guys can take a look at this. Feel free to pause the video if you want to look at it a bit longer, but I will just keep going. We also wanted to include a slide on caffeine interactions, and the most common one that we found was caffeine and alcohol. This is not a slide to tell you what to do or that it's a horrible thing to do, but since caffeine is a drug with its own experiences and its own sensations, and alcohol is also a separate drug with its separate changes in your body and mind, presumably when you combine them together, these effects will either overlap or compound or cancel out. So it is really important just to understand what's happening in your body when you are combining these two substances. We already understand how caffeine works. We went over that earlier, but briefly, alcohol is a depressant drug, which means that it has a depressant effect on our nervous system. This doesn't mean that it makes you sad or that it makes you depressed, but basically it's going to do things like decrease your inhibition, decrease your alertness, impair your motor skills, maybe impair your sense of judgment. So in other words, we could probably say that alcohol turns the volume down in our brains. As we learned earlier, caffeine blocks these volume down signals in our body, which means that it's going to actually hide the depressant effect of alcohol. And this can be potentially dangerous because it can cause people to drink more, become more aware than they realize, become more impaired than they realize, and it can also mislead people on their level of intoxication. And these instances can actually heighten dangers of alcohol poisoning and any other dangers that are associated with intoxication. So again, we're not telling you what to do. This is not kind of us telling you that caffeine and alcohol is bad, but if you're ever in a situation where alcohol and caffeine are being consumed together, we just feel it's really important to be aware of yourself and how you're feeling, and also maybe be mindful of others if this is ever a situation that you find yourself encountered in.
Okay, so some withdrawal symptoms of caffeine. So if you develop a dependence on caffeine, a sudden cutback can cause symptoms such as headache, fatigue, difficulty concentrating, and flu-like symptoms such as nausea and muscle pain. So to properly reduce your caffeine intake, rather than suddenly like cutting out caffeine, it's best to like kind of slowly reduce your intake. So one way to do that is by switching out a regular coffee for decaf coffee, which has much less caffeine content than your regular coffee. Or you can even alternate between the two daily. So for example, if on Monday you consume regular coffee, then on Tuesday you can consume decaf, and then Wednesday regular, Thursday decaf, and so on. Or if you don't like to drink coffee, maybe you like to drink energy drinks or soda, then you can substitute that out for water, or you can alternate between the two. So maybe like on Monday, if you drink an energy drink or soda, then maybe Tuesday you should just drink water, and then Wednesday you drink an energy drink or soda, and so on. So there are quite a few alternatives to managing your caffeine. One way is by decaf coffee, which, as we've just mentioned, it has much less caffeine content than your regular coffee. There's also caffeine-free tea you can try. Uh, Matcha is actually a form of green tea that provides a high concentration of antioxidants, and it has a much slower release of caffeine than coffee. So it's really great for maintaining energy throughout the day. There's also golden milk or turmeric latte, which is another really good alternative. It provides many anti-inflammatory benefits, and it's also caffeine free. So it's really great for helping you to maintain concentration. It's because turmeric latte, it reduces inflammation in your body. And many of the difficulties associated with concentration can be due to inflammation. So golden milk turmeric latte is a really good alternative. Drinking more water definitely helps. It's really important to stay hydrated as it helps with alertness and concentration. So one way is to actually like alternate your caffeinated drinks with water. So that kind of helps to reduce your caffeine intake over time. And finally, there's maca, which is actually an adaptogen. So an adaptogen is like a natural plant or herb that helps your body to naturally deal with stress. It also helps to improve concentration and to combat fatigue. And maca is available as a supplement or as a powder form, which you can add to things like your smoothies, oatmeals, any sweets, anything you want. Okay, and the recommended daily caffeine intake. So according to CAMH, the average caffeine consumption for Canadian is 210 to 238 milligrams per day. About 400 milligrams of caffeine a day will not likely cause any harm to your body. So that's equal to around 237 milliliter cups of coffee. Anything more than 600 milligrams of caffeine a day, that can cause trouble sleeping, an increase in nervousness or anxiety. So that's about like 6 to 8 cups of coffee a day. But it's really important to remember that the actual caffeine content in beverages can vary widely, depending on things like the cup size and the type of the drink, especially for energy drinks. So it's really important to keep this in mind, um, you know, uh, to get a good sense of how much caffeine you're intaking.
Okay, so now we're going to look at the positive and negative health effects of caffeine. So with all this information regarding caffeine, one may wonder why people consume it. Caffeine itself is not a toxic substance, as it does have its advantages such as brain stimulation, elevated mood, alertness, and enhances performance while postponing fatigue. So this is one of the main reasons why students drink it. However, when it's consumed in large portions within a small amount of time, that's when the downsides will kick in, and these downsides will cause more harm than good. And these downsides can be seen on the slide here.
Okay, so as we know, caffeine can be found in a variety of things. For example, coffees, teas, and energy drinks. And these are substances that we do find ourselves consuming every day for some extent. So I think it's, as mentioned before, if your daily dose of caffeine is higher than 600 milligrams, you might find yourself having trouble sleeping and you'll find yourself feeling anxious or restless. And some other points that we wanted to mention, other than caffeine, that there are also substances that also can affect sleep, like cannabis, which can be found through edibles or got through smoking or vaping, as well as melatonin, which can be found in the form of pills or even gummies. So I think it's important to really remember that these effects from these substances are temporary. In particular to caffeine, sometimes we'll find ourselves wanting to kind of consume more of this to make that awake feeling or to feel more focused and that effect to be much more lasting. And this can actually have more downsides. Although it's not bad to consume caffeine because, as we've previously mentioned, many of us do consume it and it does help us get through our studies or keep us focused. But it's when you begin to lose balance between getting good sleep and your caffeine consumption, which may be a sign to reflect on how it might be affecting your overall mental well being. So, in regards to mental wellness, we'll be discussing the importance of balancing between your own caffeine use as well as the importance of regulating sleep as a student.
Okay, so although drinking caffeine as a means to stay awake is seen as the norm for students, it does have adverse effects. Caffeine can cause one to have difficulty with sleep. Sleep is required for the body to repair itself. So think about those long days of lectures and assignments you had. If the body does not have at least 8 hours to repair itself, it won't be ready for the next day. And a lack of sleep can cause poor performance in school. So now we're going to move on to the next reflection question. So here's a reflection question that asks, how has caffeine affected your sleep schedule and what ways were you able to manage it? Please feel free to pause the video and take time to think about these questions and then press play when you're ready.
Okay, so I hope you've taken some time to think about that question and you've come up with some nice answers, or it was a nice reflection for you. So we'll be ending things off with some points regarding the benefits of sleep, as well as just a few tips. So some benefits of sleep include it helps maintain good energy. So you'll find yourself much more energized and awake when you're able to maintain your caffeine intake, as well as when you give yourself a good amount of sleep. And if you think about it, you have good energy, you're much more awake. This can help assist in regulating your emotions, right? You're more awake, thus you're more aware of your emotions and your ability to control them. If you've ever found yourself not getting enough sleep, you wake up in the morning and you're like, oh, I'm feeling so cranky today. It's because lack of sleep causes irritability and also causes you to have that lack of focus, right? And one last point was that it also can help maintain a strong immune system. So sleep can help produce cytokines, which actually help fighting infections, right? And this is an important point to remember because not only is it a physiological benefit, but mentally you're going to find yourself feeling more ready and active for the day. So just a few tips to end things off with, to help yourself get a good night's rest would include lifestyle changes. For example, establishing a night routine, maybe getting off your phone for an hour before heading to bed, limit your napping. I know we all happen to take naps in our schedule to catch up on sleep, but you might find yourself having trouble sleeping later at night. So maybe if you find that becoming an issue, start to limit your nap times. And also, as we talked about with caffeine, maybe limit your caffeine intake, find a lot of other alternatives that might work for you, as well as physical activity, which can actually help you fall asleep later at night. And one last point is that REM sleep is good sleep. If you're not sure what REM sleep is, REM sleep, it stands for rapid eye movement sleep. So your eyes are basically moving rapidly when you're in a very deep state of sleep, right? So as Audrey did mention before, you have to get your 8 hours in, but sometimes even though the quantity of sleep is important, so is the quality of sleep, right? So sometimes you'll find yourself feeling tired even if you've gotten your 8 hours, but that probably means that there was a lack of quality in regards to your sleep. So at the end of the day, in regards to mental wellness, balance between these two things, sleep and your caffeine consumption, is key.
And now we want to thank you for watching. And if you have any questions, please feel free to contact the Health and Wellness Center.